The scent of antiseptic and quiet desperation clung to Nurse Anya Sharma like a second skin. It was the smell of Pacific General Hospital, the smell of her life for the past 2 years, a life meticulously constructed from beige scrubs, sensible shoes, and the deferential nod she gave to doctors who had a fraction of her experience, but a mountain more of institutional authority. She was good at her job, efficient, quiet, almost invisible. She charted with precision, changed IV bags before they could beep, and could soothe a terrified patient with a low murmur and a steady hand. To the rest of the staff in the frenetic chaos of the emergency department, she was just Nurse Sharma, reliable, unremarkable, just another body to fill a 12-hour shift. That was the point. Anonymity was a fortress. "Sharma, bed 6 needs a new drip, and try to look alive, it's not a funeral home," Dr. Marcus Thorne barked as he swept past, his Gucci loafers squeaking on the polished linoleum. He was the reigning king of the ED, a brilliant diagnostician with a god complex and the bedside manner of a cornered badger. He saw her as little more than a pair of hands. Anya simply nodded, her expression placid. "Yes, doctor." Inside, she catalogued the minutiae of his diagnosis on the patient he'd just left. Classic presentation of pancreatitis, but he'd missed the faint scleral icterus. It was likely a gallstone obstruction. She'd make sure the labs he ordered included a bilirubin panel, just in case. He'd take the credit for the catch, of course. He always did. Let him. Credit was dangerous. Recognition was a spotlight, and she had spent years learning to live in the shadows. Her ghost had to remain a ghost. The day was a typical whirlwind of chest pains, broken bones, and the ambient misery of a city's underbelly. Then the ambulance call came through. "ETA 2 minutes, the radio crackled. "Male, approximately 50, found unresponsive, GCS of 7. Vitals are unstable, BP 80/40 and falling." Chaos erupted in a controlled, practiced way. Trauma Bay 1 was prepped. Thorne strode into the center of the room, snapping on a pair of gloves. "All right, people, let's look sharp. What else we got?" "Not much," the charge nurse replied. "No ID, no witnesses. Just found him in an alley downtown. Looks like another homeless John Doe. Probably sepsis from an abscess or an OD." Thorne sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Another one. Get Narcan ready and let's have a central line kit on standby." The automatic doors hissed open, and the paramedics rushed in, their faces grim. The man on the gurney was nondescript. Weathered face, graying hair cropped short, a body that was lean but had a wiry strength beneath the grime and cheap clothing. He didn't look like the usual men they brought in from the alleys. There was a hardness to him, a structure to his features that spoke of a different life. Anya felt a flicker of something, a resonance she couldn't name. She pushed it down. "All right, on my count. 1, 2, 3. They transferred him to the bed. The monitors immediately screamed their protest. His heart rate was thready and fast, his oxygen saturation plummeting. "No visible trauma, no track marks," a resident called out. "Lungs sound clear." "He's burning up," Anya said, her hand on the man's forehead. It was a dry, radiating heat that was all wrong. "Temp is 104.8. "Classic septic shock," Thorne declared, already moving on to the next step in his mental checklist. "Massive fluid resuscitation, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and get him on pressors. Let's move, people." The team descended, a flurry of needles, tubes, and commands. Anya worked silently, efficiently. She secured an airway, drew blood for the labs Thorne ordered, her movements economical and sure. But she was watching the patient, really watching. Something was wrong. It wasn't sepsis. The presentation was close, a perfect mimicry, but the details were off. The man's pupils were pinpoint, but not in the way of an opioid overdose. They didn't react to the Narcan they pushed. And there was a tremor, a micro-tremor in his left eyelid, a rhythmic, almost mechanical flutter. It was a signal. A ghost of a memory from another life, another world, surfaced in her mind. A briefing in a dusty tent in a place she was forbidden to name, a slide on a PowerPoint about atypical neurological agents. "Look for the tells," a gravelly voice had said. "The things that don't fit the textbook. The enemy is writing a new book." She pushed the memory away. Hard. That life was over. She was Nurse Sharma now. His pressure is still dropping, the resident announced, his voice tight with worry. We're maxing out on levo. Then add vaso, Thorne snapped, not looking up from the central line he was placing. This is what sepsis does. It's a cascade. We just have to stay ahead of it. But they weren't ahead of it. They were chasing it and losing. Dr. Thorne, Anya said, her voice quiet but clear. He ignored her. Dr. Thorne, she repeated, a little louder. He paused, glaring at her over his surgical mask. What is it, Sharma? I'm busy saving a life here. The condescension was a physical force. His presentation is atypical for septic shock, she said, choosing her words carefully. The fixed pupils, the specific tremor. It suggests a possible neurotoxic component. Thorne actually laughed, a short, sharp, incredulous bark. Neurotoxic? Nurse, he was found in an alley. He's septic. He's not a spy who's been hit with a secret nerve agent. Stick to hanging fluids. A few of the other nurses snickered. Anya's face remained a blank mask. I recommend we run a plasma cholinesterase level and a full metabolic panel with lactate, she continued, her voice even, and a spectrographic analysis of his blood. Thorne stared at her. A spectrographic what? Do you have any idea how much that costs? Or that it's a specialized research test we can't just run? We have a diagnosis. It's sepsis. Now, are you going to help or are you going to play make-believe doctor? Not a question. A statement. Anya felt a cold fury rise, but her training, her real training, took over. Emotion was a liability. My apologies, doctor, she said, her voice flat. I'll draw the labs you requested. She turned away, her movements betraying none of the turmoil inside. She drew the blood, labeling the vials for the standard tests Thorne had ordered, but she drew one extra, a dark red tube that she palmed, keeping it hidden. She had to know. If she was wrong, it was a wasted vial of blood and a minor breach of protocol. If she was right, she didn't let herself finish the thought. The patient was moved to the ICU, his condition listed as critical. Terminal was the unspoken consensus. He was another John Doe who wouldn't see the sunrise. The hospital machine would document his decline, and in the morning, the morgue would have a new resident. Anya finished her shift, her mind 1,000 miles away. The tremor in the man's eyelid played on a loop in her head. Instead of going home, she took the hidden vial of blood to the small, underfunded pathology lab in the hospital's basement. Leo, the night shift lab tech, was a creature of habit and caffeine. He looked up from his crossword puzzle, his glasses perched on his nose. Hey, Sharma, late shift? Something like that, she said, placing the vial on the counter. I need a favor, Leo, an off-the-books favor. He eyed the unlabeled tube. Thorne going to have my hide? Thorne doesn't know about it. It's for the John Doe from Trauma 1. I have a hunch. Leo sighed. He had a soft spot for Anya. She was one of the few who treated him like a human being. What kind of hunch? The kind that needs a mass spectrometer, she said. Leo's eyebrows shot up. Anya, that thing's a relic. We only use it for esoteric toxicology research. It takes hours to calibrate, and I'd have to justify the power draw. Please, Leo. She cut him off, her voice dropping, losing its clinical edge for just a second. It's important. He saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't the look of a curious nurse. It was something else, something harder. All right, he said, rubbing his tired eyes. But you owe me. Big time. It'll take me most of the night to get you a result. Thank you, she said, the relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. Call me as soon as you have anything. Anya went home, but she didn't sleep. She sat in her small, sparse apartment, staring at the wall, the ghosts of the past swirling around her. The dust, the screams, the coppery scent of blood overwhelming the senses, the faces of the men she couldn't save. She had come here to escape that, to be normal, but the past had a way of finding you. Her phone buzzed at 4:17 a.m. It was Leo. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice hushed and strange. I ran the sample. It's weird. Weird how? Anya asked, her heart starting to pound. It's clean. Too clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no signs of infection. But there's this anomaly. A protein signature I've never seen before. It's not biological. It looks synthetic. Coated, almost. And there's a trace metallic element that has no business being in a human body. It's shielded. Whatever it is, it's designed to be hidden. Anya closed her eyes. It was worse than she thought. Thank you, Leo. I need you to do something for me. Erase the test. Delete the data. Pretend this conversation never happened. There was a pause. Anya, what the hell's going on? This is something we should report. No, she said, her voice iron. It's something we should forget. Please, Leo. Trust me. He hesitated, then sighed. Okay, Sharma. For you, but I don't like it. This feels dangerous. It is, she whispered after hanging up. She threw on her scrubs and raced back to the hospital, her mind a blur of protocols she thought she had buried forever. Synthetic proteins. Shielded metallic elements. It was a weapon, a biological Trojan horse, and it was active in the man lying in her ICU. She strode into the ICU, her face set. The night shift nurse looked up, surprised. Sharma, you're not on till 7. I'm checking on the John Doe in bed 4, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She pulled up his chart on the computer terminal. His vitals were worse. Multi-organ failure was imminent. Thorne's diagnosis of septic shock was technically correct in that the body was shutting down, but the cause was all wrong. She needed to access his full file, see if there were any incoming records, any military service flags that might have been missed. She typed in his temporary patient ID. The screen blinked. Patient record not found. Anya frowned. A glitch, maybe. She tried again. Patient record not found. A cold dread washed over her. She went to the main ICU terminal, the one the charge nurse used. She tried searching by bed number. The system showed ICU bed 4 as unoccupied. That's impossible, she muttered. He's right there. She looked through the glass. The man was still in the bed, hooked up to a dozen machines, his chest rising and falling in a shallow machine-driven rhythm. Marge, can you pull up the file for the John Doe in 4? Anya asked the charge nurse. My terminal is acting up. Marge, a veteran nurse with 20 years in the trenches, typed in the credentials. Her brow furrowed. That's funny. He's not here. What do you mean he's not here? I mean he's not in the system. His record is gone. Poof. She tried another search. His admission record, his labs, Thorne's notes, everything. It's like he was never here. Anya's blood ran cold. This wasn't a glitch. This was a purge. Someone had reached into the hospital's secure network and surgically removed every trace of the man's existence. The test she'd ordered, Leo's unauthorized mass spectrometry, it had tripped an alarm. Not a hospital alarm, but something else, something external. Someone very powerful was watching this man. And now they were watching the hospital. Suddenly, the alarms on the patient's monitor blared to life. A single, terrifying, continuous tone. A systole. Flatline. He's crashing, Marge yelled, hitting the code blue button on the wall. The room exploded into motion. Doors flew open. The code team, led by a bleary-eyed Dr. Thorne who had been sleeping in an on-call room, flooded into the space. What happened? Thorne demanded, shoving his way to the bedside. He just went into a systole, Marge said. No warning. Start compressions. 1 milligram of epi now, Thorne commanded. A resident jumped onto a stool and began the brutal rhythm of CPR. Anya grabbed the bag valve mask, forcing air into the man's lungs, but her mind was elsewhere. This wasn't a normal cardiac arrest. This was a shutdown. The synthetic agent Leo had found. It had reached its final stage. Pushing epi! A nurse called out. Still a systole, the resident said, sweat beading on his forehead. They worked on him for 5 minutes, 10, 15. They pushed epinephrine, atropine, bicarbonate. They tried everything in the ACLS algorithm. Nothing. The flat line on the monitor remained, a stubborn, unwavering testament to their failure. Thorne looked at the monitor, then at the exhausted resident, then at the clock. His face was grim. All right, he said, his voice heavy. That's it. Let's call it. It was the sensible thing to do, the protocol-driven thing. They had done everything they could. No, Anya said. The single word cut through the exhausted quiet of the room. Thorne turned to her, his face a mask of disbelief and irritation. Excuse me, nurse. You can't call it, she said, her voice low and intense. She hadn't moved from the head of the bed. "He's not gone." "The monitor says otherwise," Thorne said, "his patient's gone. His heart has been stopped for 17 minutes. There's no coming back from that. It's over. Time of death." "It's not a cardiac arrest," Anya interrupted, her gaze locked on the patient. "It's an induced autonomic failure. The agent is suppressing the sinoatrial node. Compressions and epi are useless." The entire room went silent. Everyone stared at her. At Nurse Sharma, the quiet, unassuming nurse, who was now directly contradicting the head of the emergency department with jargon no one understood. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "And what, precisely, do you know about autonomic failure, Sharma? Did you read a fascinating article on the internet?" The mockery was thick, but Anya didn't even flinch. Her gaze lifted from the patient and met Thorne's. The placid, deferential nurse was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone with eyes that had seen things Thorne could only imagine in his worst nightmares. Her authority was absolute, radiating from her like a physical force. "I know that he has less than 2 minutes before the cellular decay becomes irreversible," she said, her voice cold as ice. "And I know how to stop it. So you have a choice, doctor. You can stand there and let him die, or you can get out of my way." For a heart-stopping second, no one moved. The air crackled with tension. Thorne was speechless, his arrogance colliding with the sheer, unshakable certainty in Anya's eyes. Then, the patient on the bed, the man who was clinically dead, shuddered. His eyes, which had been fixed and dilated, fluttered open. They were cloudy, unfocused, but they found Anya. A strangled, rasping sound escaped his lips, a single word, barely audible, but it echoed in the silent room like a cannon shot. "Valkyrie!" The name hung in the air, alien and powerful. Thorne's jaw went slack. The residents and nurses stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. The man's eyes rolled back into his head. The faint electrical activity his effort had produced on the monitor vanished. He was flatlining again, but everything had changed. "What did he call you?" Thorne whispered, his voice full of awe and fear. Anya ignored him. The time for hiding was over. The time for quiet deference was a luxury she could no longer afford. A man's life was on the line, a man who knew her, a man from her past. Anya Sharma, the nurse, ceased to exist. In her place stood Dr. Anya Sharma, callsign Valkyrie, formerly of the Joint Special Operations Command's most elite surgical unit, and she was going to work. "I am taking command of this code," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned the room into obedience. It was not a request. It was an order. "Get him off the bed and onto the floor. Now." The team, including Thorne, hesitated for a split second, then scrambled to follow her command. They were acting on pure instinct, responding to a level of command presence they had never before witnessed in a hospital setting. "Marge," Anya snapped, "I need a number 10 blade, a giggly saw, and a Lebsha knife, full thoracotomy tray, and get me the longest epidural needle you can find, and a vial of adenosine." The list was so bizarre, so outside the realm of any standard procedure, that Marge just stared. "A giggly saw? Anya, what are you— Did I stutter?" Anya's voice was like flint. "Move!" Marge ran. "You," Anya pointed to the resident who had been doing compressions. "Continue CPR, but I want you to change the vector. I don't want you pushing straight down. I want you pushing inferiorly and to the left. You're not trying to pump his heart, you're trying to manually stimulate the phrenic nerve. Do you understand?" The resident, wide-eyed, just nodded and adjusted his position. Thorne finally found his voice. "Sharma, doctor, whoever you are, you can't just crack a man's chest in the middle of the ICU. This is insane. It's butchery." Anya didn't even look at him. "It's called a resuscitative thoracotomy, and it's his only chance. His heart isn't the problem. It's the electrical signal telling it to beat. The agent has severed that connection. I'm going to create a new one." Marge returned, her arms full of sterile packs. She slapped them onto a tray. Anya tore open a pair of gloves, her movements a blur of practiced efficiency. "I need suction," she commanded, "and I need someone to manage the airway. Keep him ventilated." She took the scalpel. Without a moment's hesitation, she made a long, sweeping incision from his sternum to his back, along the line of the 5th intercostal space. Blood welled, but not as much as there should have been. His circulation was virtually non-existent. "Rib spreaders," she ordered. Thorn, his face pale with shock, instinctively grabbed the instrument and handed it to her. He had become her assistant. The king was now a pawn. Anya inserted the spreaders and cranked them open. There was a sickening series of cracks as the man's ribs gave way. The thoracic cavity was exposed. The medical team gasped. They were looking at a living man's lung and the still silent sac of his pericardium. "He's not in V-fib, he's not in PEA, he's in neural cascade failure," Anya explained, her voice a calm, didactic counterpoint to the brutal reality of the procedure. Her hands never stopped moving. "The nanites have formed a blockade around the SA and AV nodes. It's like cutting the wires to a light switch. No amount of power from the grid will turn it on. We have to bypass the switch." She took the scalpel again and sliced open the pericardial sac. The man's heart lay beneath. It was flaccid, motionless. "Dear God," Thorn breathed. Anya slipped her hand beneath the heart, cradling the dead muscle in her palm. "Starting cardiac massage." She began to squeeze, a rhythmic, controlled compression. Her eyes were fixed on the monitor. Nothing. "It's not enough," she said, her voice tight. "The blockade is too strong. I need to reboot it directly." She looked up. "Give me the epidural needle and the adenosine." A nurse, her hand trembling, passed them over. "This is the part that's not in any textbook," Anya said, almost to herself. She filled the syringe. "The agent is designed to withstand a defibrillator shock. It dissipates the energy, but it's vulnerable to a chemical reset if you can deliver it directly to the source." She angled the impossibly long needle. "This is a one-time shot. If I miss the sinoatrial node, I'll puncture the atrium and he'll bleed out in seconds. If I hit it—" She didn't finish. The room held its collective breath. The only sounds were the soft whoosh of the ventilator and the creak of the rib spreaders. Anya's eyes were focused, her hand as steady as granite. She was back in the desert, with sand and rotor wash for an orchestra, working by the light of a single chem light. She had done this before, not on a human, on a simulation, a billion-dollar simulation in a DARPA lab that had been deemed a failure. They said it was impossible. "Watch me." She pushed the needle in, deep into the muscle of the still heart, aiming for a spot no bigger than a grain of rice. She could feel the subtle shift in tissue density through the tip of the needle. There. She pushed the plunger. For a terrible second, nothing happened. The flat line on the monitor remained. A crushing sense of failure washed over her. She had been wrong. She had butchered this man for nothing. Then, a single miraculous blip appeared on the screen. Beep. It was followed by another, and another, a slow, ragged but definite sinus rhythm. The heart in her hand gave a weak, tentative flutter, then a stronger one. It began to beat. A wave of gasps and choked sobs went through the room. The resident doing compression stumbled back, his face a mask of utter disbelief. Marge was openly crying. Thorn stared at the monitor, then at Anya's blood-soaked gloves, then back at the monitor. He looked like a man who had just seen the laws of physics rewritten. "His pressure is coming up," a nurse whispered, her voice full of awe. "BP is 90/60, sinus tach at 110. He was alive. She had pulled him back from the absolute edge of death. Anya gently removed her hand from his chest. She began the process of closing, her movements just as precise, just as economical, but the tension in her shoulders was gone. She placed chest tubes, sutured the pericardium, and began to wire the ribs back together. The team, still stunned, moved to help her, their previous arrogance replaced by a quiet, profound respect. When the final stitch was in place and a sterile dressing covered the massive wound, Anya straightened up. She peeled off her bloody gloves and dropped them on the tray. The room was silent. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor. The most beautiful sound in the world. Anya finally looked at Thorn. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw no arrogance in his eyes, only a deep, humbling confusion and a dawning understanding. He started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "I don't know who you are, or what you are, but I have been a doctor for 25 years, and I have never, ever seen anything like that. I was wrong. I was arrogant. And you saved that man's life when I was ready to put him in a body bag." He took a deep breath. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. "I'm sorry," he said, "and thank you." It was an apology, a surrender, a transfer of power. The professional conflict was over, but as Anya looked at the stabilized patient, at the man who had called her Valkyrie, she knew the real battle had just begun. The people who had purged his file from their system would not be happy that he was still alive. And now they knew where to find her. Her ghost was no longer a ghost. She was a target. They moved the patient, whose name they still didn't know, to a private room in the ICU, a room at the end of the hall with only one entrance. Thorne, now her staunchest ally, had arranged it himself, citing the need for extreme infection control. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was enough. He stood with Anya outside the glass door, watching the nurse inside check the man's vitals. "You need to tell me what's going on," Thorne said, his voice low. "That man's file didn't just disappear. Someone erased it. The IT director told me it was a clean wipe, originating from outside the network, a professional job, and that procedure you did, that wasn't medicine. That was something else." Anya leaned against the wall, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. "It was combat medicine," she corrected him quietly. "Improvisational. You use what you have and you do what you must. Protocol is a luxury for when you have time and resources. We had neither." "Combat medicine?" Thorne pressed. "The most advanced combat surgeons in the world are at Walter Reed. They publish papers. I've read them. None of them describe that." He gestured toward the room. "And this man, he knew you. He called you Valkyrie. That's not a name for a nurse." Anya closed her eyes. The past was no longer knocking at the door. It had kicked the door down. "It was my call sign," she admitted, the word feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years. "A long time ago." Before she could say more, the nurse inside the room signaled to them. The patient was stirring. He was trying to communicate. They entered the room. The man was intubated, and his hands were in soft restraints to prevent him from pulling out his lines, but his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on Anya. She moved to his bedside and gently took his hand. "It's okay. You're safe." He shook his head weakly. He motioned with his eyes toward a tablet on the bedside table. Anya picked it up and held it for him. He laboriously typed a single word with his restrained finger. "Vance." "Your name is Vance?" Anya asked. He nodded. He typed again. "Master Zed Elias Vance." The name hit Anya like a physical blow. Master Sergeant Vance. He had been the senior NCO for the security detail on her last deployment. A quiet, professional soldier with kind eyes who always made sure her surgical team had extra water and the first pick of the mail. She remembered him vividly, but he was supposed to be dead. Everyone from that operation was supposed to be dead. "Vance, it's me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's Dr. Sharma, Anya." He gave a weak smile around the tube in his mouth. He typed again, his fingers moving faster now with more urgency. "They said you died in the blast." "I was thrown clear," she said, the memory a flash of fire and pain. "I was the only one." His eyes filled with a desperate intensity. "Not a blast. Nightingale. Operation Nightingale. The official name for the mission. The name that was seared into her soul. A forward operating base. A sudden catastrophic mortar attack. Her entire surgical team, her friends, gone. All the patients they were treating, gone." She had carried the weight of that failure, the guilt of being the sole survivor, for years. It was why she had run. Why she had buried Dr. Sharma and become Nurse Sharma. She couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for lives again. "It wasn't mortars, Doc," Vance typed, his thumb jabbing at the screen. "It was a clean sweep. Our own guys, Kincaid, Director Robert Kincaid, the man in the expensive suit from the clandestine agency that oversaw their unit. The man who gave the briefings and spoke of national security with cold, dead eyes." Anya felt the floor drop out from under her. "The patients," Vance continued typing, "they were the experiment, nanites, supposed to heal. They went bad, started consuming. Kincaid ordered the site sterilized. You, me, the patients, all of us, we were loose ends." The world tilted on its axis. The mortar attack had been a lie, a cover story. The men and women she had mourned, the failure she had carried. It wasn't her fault. It was a betrayal, a cold-blooded execution. I wasn't a failure. I was a witness, a loose end they thought they had tied up. My God, the guilt I carried for all these years. It was a phantom limb, an ache for a wound that wasn't even mine. I built this entire life, this prison of anonymity, based on a lie. Kincaid didn't just kill my team. He buried me alive under the weight of his deception. He made me my own jailer. The nanites, she said out loud, the pieces clicking into place with sickening precision. That's what was in your blood. That's why your file was erased. They're still active. Vance nodded. They have a shelf life, a shutdown protocol. Mine just activated. I knew they were hunting me. I went to ground, got myself admitted as a duo, hoped I'd just fade. Didn't count on you being here. The test I ran, Anya realized. The spectrograph. It must have flagged some database. That's how they knew you were here. What test? Thorne asked, his face a grim canvas of confusion. Anya explained quickly, her mind racing. A specialized blood analysis. It detected the synthetic proteins and shielded metallic signature of the nanites. So you didn't just save him from a cardiac arrest, Thorne said, the scale of the situation dawning on him. You rebooted him. You found a way to counteract a military-grade bioweapon. For now, Anya said, it's a temporary fix. The nanites are still in his system. They'll adapt. They'll try again. As if on cue, the double doors at the far end of the ICU hallway swung open. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits walked in. They moved with an unnerving synchronicity, their eyes scanning the floor, assessing, categorizing. They were not hospital staff. They were predators. Behind them walked a third man. He was older, with silver hair and a face that was handsome in a severe, unforgiving way. He wore a suit that cost more than Anya's car. It was Director Robert Kincaid. His cold, intelligent eyes swept across the ICU and landed on the private room at the end of the hall. On Thorne and on her. A flicker of something crossed his face, not surprise, recognition, and annoyance. The expression of a man discovering a problem he thought he had already solved. Seal the ICU, Anya said to Thorne, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Now, no one in or out. Thorne didn't question her. He hit the emergency lockdown button on the wall panel. Heavy magnetic locks engaged with a solid thump. A reinforced door slid shut, sealing the ICU from the rest of the hospital. Kincaid and his men were trapped inside with them, or rather, they were all trapped in here with Kincaid. Kincaid didn't seem concerned by the lockdown. He walked slowly, deliberately down the hallway, his expensive shoes making no sound. His men flanked him, their jackets unbuttoned just enough to show the holstered firearms beneath. He stopped outside Vance's room. He looked through the glass, first at Vance, then at Anya. He offered a small, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dr. Sharma, he said, his voice smooth and cultured, easily penetrating the glass. It's a pleasure to see you again. We were under the unfortunate impression that you had perished. You were under the impression you had murdered me, Anya corrected him, her voice trembling with a cold, controlled rage. Kincaid's smile widened slightly. Details, details. The important thing is, you're alive, and, it would seem, still quite skilled. He gestured vaguely toward Vance. An impressive feat. We've been trying to crack that shutdown protocol for years. He wasn't here to kill them. Not yet. He was here for the data. He saw Vance not as a man, but as a failed experiment. He saw Anya not as a survivor, but as an unexpected breakthrough, an asset. This is a sterile medical facility, Thorne said, stepping forward, finding his courage. He was on Anya's side now, completely. You have no authority here. I'm ordering you and your men to leave. One of Kincaid's men chuckled. Kincaid held up a hand. Doctor, Thorne, is it? Head of emergency medicine, an impressive career. It would be a shame for it to end so abruptly over a misunderstanding. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. This man is my patient, Thorne said, his jaw tight. He is under my protection. Your patient, Kincaid said, is a piece of stolen government property, and he is a national security risk, as is Dr. Sharma now that she has demonstrated knowledge she should not possess. I am here to rectify that situation. You have two options. You can open that door and hand them both over to me, or we can have a much more unpleasant conversation. This was the choice. Run, fight, or surrender. Anya had been running for years. She was done running. She looked at Vance, lying helpless in the bed. She looked at Thorne, standing his ground against a man who could erase him with a phone call. She looked at Kincaid, the architect of her pain. The ghost surgeon was gone. Dr. Anya Sharma was back, and she was a fighter. "You're not getting him," she said, her voice clear and steady, "and you're not getting me." Kincaid sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. "Dr. Sharma, I trained you. I know you. You're a pragmatist, a realist. You save lives. Think of the lives you could save with our resources. The Nightingale Project was a failure, I admit, but the research has applications. With what you've just done, with your intuitive leap, we could perfect it. We could create soldiers who cannot be killed, who can heal from any wound. All you have to do is cooperate." It was the devil's bargain, her expertise, her soul, in exchange for a seat at his table. "You're talking about creating weapons," Anya shot back. "I'm a doctor. I heal people. I don't build monsters." "The world is a monstrous place, Anya," Kincaid said, his tone turning paternal, condescending. "We need monsters to fight them. You, of all people, should understand that." "I understand that you murdered my team in cold blood to cover up your failures," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I understand that you left this man to die, and I understand that you will do anything to protect yourself." She took a step closer to the glass. "But you made a mistake. You let me live, and you let him live long enough to talk to me." She held up her phone. "This entire conversation, starting from the moment you walked into my ICU, has been recorded, and it's been live streaming to a very secure, encrypted server that a certain investigative journalist I once saved in Kandahar has the password to. A dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 10 minutes, he gets a notification." Kincaid's smile finally vanished. His face went rigid. "Furthermore," Anya continued, pressing her advantage, "every byte of data from the mass spectrometer, every note I've made on Master Sergeant Vance's condition, including the full telemetry from his reboot, is on that server as well. You can kill us, you can sterilize this entire floor, but you cannot erase the truth. Not again." She was bluffing, partially. The recording was real. The dead man's switch was an improvisation, but in his world, the world of shadows and paranoia, the possibility was enough. Kincaid's men shifted, their hands moving closer to their weapons. "You think a recording can stop me?" Kincaid hissed, his composure cracking. "No," Anya said calmly, "but he can." She pointed past Kincaid toward the main nursing station. Thorne, using the distraction, had quietly slipped away. He was now standing next to the main gas line controls for the ICU. His hand was on the large red emergency shutoff valve for the oxygen supply. "That man is a monster," Thorne said, his voice shaking but resolute. "But he's my monster, and this is my hospital. Those men have firearms. We have something a little more potent. You're in a sealed environment with an oxygen concentration of over 40%. Any firearm discharge, even a spark from a taser, and this entire wing becomes a funeral pyre. Your men, my staff, your precious asset." He looked Kincaid dead in the eye. "And you." Checkmate. It was a standoff, Kincaid's guns against the very air they were breathing. A move in either direction meant mutually assured destruction. Kincaid stared at Anya, then at Thorne. He saw not a frightened nurse and a pompous doctor. He saw two people who had been pushed too far, who had nothing left to lose. He saw a reflection of his own ruthlessness. He had underestimated them. Badly. For a long minute, the only sound was the beeping of Vance's monitor, steady, rhythmic, alive. Finally, Kincaid gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He had lost, for now. "This isn't over, Dr. Sharma," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've made a very powerful enemy today." "I've known you for years, Kincaid," Anya retorted. "You've always been my enemy. The only difference is, now I'm fighting back." Kincaid turned without another word. He gestured to Thorne. "Open the door." Thorne hesitated, looking at Anya. She nodded. He unlocked the lockdown. The heavy door slid open. Kincaid and his men walked out, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. The immediate threat was gone. Anya sagged against the wall, the strength leaving her legs. Thorne rushed to her side. "Are you all right?" I will be, she breathed. We need to move him, now, and we need to analyze the data from his procedure. We have to find a permanent countermeasure for those nanites before Kincaid decides to cut his losses and tries something louder. The aftermath was a blur of hushed conversations and high-level meetings. The hospital administration, briefed by a passionate and newly humbled Dr. Thorne, was in a state of controlled panic and utter awe. They had a ghost in their midst, a surgeon with skills that bordered on science fiction and enemies that belonged in a spy thriller. They could have fired her. They could have buried the entire incident. But Thorne, to his eternal credit, wouldn't allow it. This woman, he told the hospital board, his voice ringing with conviction, is a generational talent. What she did was not just save a life. She opened a door to a new field of medicine, a field we know nothing about. To let her go would not only be a moral failure, it would be an institutional one. We cannot be afraid of what we don't understand. We must embrace it. And so they made her an offer, not a promotion, an invention. They offered her a blank check, her own department, her own lab, her own staff, carte blanche to create a new division within Pacific General. The Center for Advanced Trauma and Atypical Pathologies, the hospital president had called it, a place to study, to heal, and to prepare for the kind of medicine that didn't come from textbooks, a place for the cases that fell between the cracks, a place for the ghosts. Anya accepted. She had spent years hiding from who she was. Now she would build a sanctuary for it. The final scene of her old life played out a week later. Master Sergeant Elias Vance, stabilized and breathing on his own, was being discreetly transferred to a private, secure medical facility. Anya had synthesized a targeted retro agent from the data she'd collected, a compound that would slowly and safely dismantle the nanites in his system. He was going to live. "You saved my life, Doc," he said, his voice still hoarse as they loaded him into the transport. "Twice." "You saved mine too, Master Sergeant," Anya replied, clasping his hand. "You gave me back my past." He smiled. "Go give him hell, Valkyrie." She watched him go, a sense of peace settling over her for the first time in years. 2 months later, the Katap, as the staff had nicknamed it, was operational. It was housed in a newly renovated wing of the hospital, equipped with technology that made the main OR look like a relic. Dr. Anya Sharma stood in the heart of it all. She was no longer wearing the beige scrubs of a nurse, but the dark blue tailored scrubs of a director. Her hair was pulled back, her face was clear of the perpetual weariness she had worn for so long. She looked sharp. She looked ready. Dr. Thorne, now her second-in-command and most fervent supporter, stood beside her, looking at a complex holographic display of a cellular structure. "The Vance protocol is holding," he said. "The nanite degradation is at 98%. It's a cure. You found a cure for something that technically doesn't exist." "Good," Anya said, her eyes on the data, "because he's not the only one. There were 30 other soldiers in that program. Kincaid's agency has them on ice, listed as KIA. We have to find them. We have to get to them before he does." It was an impossible mission. A new war fought not on a battlefield, but in the halls of medicine and the shadows of espionage. But she was no longer afraid. The guilt was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She was not a victim of her past. She was forged by it. "I am Dr. Anya Sharma. I was a ghost, a whisper, a memory, but now I am a weapon and I am a shield." Kincaid wanted to build monsters to fight the monsters of the world. He just never realized he had already created one. "My name is Dr. Anya Sharma, and I'm done running. My war is just beginning."